This is the third panel discussion of the day, of the workshop, and you've already heard from Marcel, but I'm going to welcome him back up to the stage for this panel, which is focusing a deep dive into the livestock sector, and it's basically the same setup as we've had before. We'll have a technical presentation, and then I'll invite the panel to come and join me up on the stage to give a few remarks and have a discussion amongst ourselves before opening the floor to the audience. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it straight over to Marcel.
Thank you very much again. So I'm giving you a very short overview of the main messages of the meat chapter this year, and meat and dairy, sorry. Mm-hmm. And here we see that the growth in meat consumption is going to is projected to increase. And we have about 47 or 48 million tons additional meat consumption over the next 10 years. And that compares to 55 over the past decade. So it's slowing down a bit. That corresponds to an annual increase of about 0.9 kilogram per capita by 2034. And in high-income countries, where consumers get increasingly sensitive to animal welfare, environmental and health concerns, that leads there to some cases where per capita meat consumption is going to stagnate. So we see improvements in breeding efficiency and slaughter yields that these are projected to mitigate the environmental impact of meat production. So globally, improved slaughter weights will account for 8%, 27%, and 90% of the gains in bovine, pig meat, and poultry meat production. And with these predicted productivity improvements and a greater share of poultry in meat production, we see that the greenhouse gas emissions are expected to rise by 6%, which is significantly less than the projected 13% increase of meat output over the coming decade. In terms of trade, we see that global meat imports will grow by just 10% compared to 37% that we saw in the last decade. And this has even a considerable downside risk if countries retrench on trade measures, and we also see China's decreasing role in meat imports here. That is expected to shift global trade patterns. China by 2034, we see that the share of global meat imports is set to decline from about 20% today to only 16% by the end of the projection period. A reduced reliance on pig meat imports has led to curbed pork production in major exporters. A similar downward trend is evident in China's poultry imports. Final slide on meat are the prices. Again, we see the prices return to their long-term trend, and in the short term, nominal ruminant meat prices, and in particular bovine prices, are projected to rise more significantly. As we see, the inventories have to rebuild, there's limiting growth in supply. And in contrast, for the non-ruminant meat prices, they are expected to first ease due to moderate production expansion and lower import demand by China. As we heard from Thomas here, we have the real feed costs going down, but we have at the same time other real operation costs assumed to remain high, which slows the growth of meat supply. And over the medium term, real meat prices are projected to fall, influenced by slowing demand, reduced real feed costs, and continuous productivity improvements. When we come to dairy, one big message is that dairy products continue to be highly valued by consumers as a key component of an overall healthy diet. As income and population increase, more dairy products are expected to be consumed globally over this medium-term horizon that we see here. And Asia, in particular India and Pakistan, will continue to have the strongest growth in consumption of fresh dairy products. Further increases in cheese consumption are expected in Europe and North America particularly. Did it change? No. This is the one, yeah. Global milk production is expected to grow steadily, primarily driven by higher yields per animal. We see that the world milk production rises 81% for cow milk, 15% for buffalo, and 4% for goat and sheep milk. That's the composition of those. Is projected to grow at 1.8% per annum, which is compared to the other growth rates that we usually report that are around 1%. It's a very strong growth in our projections. And yeah, it's fueled by increasing yield per animal with growth in the number of cows to be only moderate. And more than half of the growth in milk production is anticipated to come from India and Pakistan, whereas milk production in the European Union, the second largest producer, is expected to slightly decline even. When it comes to trade, and we have only a small share of milk products which is traded internationally, mainly in form of processed dairy products, of course. And although the milk production in the three major dairy exporters, New Zealand, European Union, and the United States, is expected to increase modestly, and their exports are projected to jointly account for nearly 70% of global milk exports. Finally, on the prices of the milk products, there's an interesting phenomenon which appeared over the past decade. And that's the gap between butter and skim milk powders, or in general, the more fat against the non-fat solids. And we see that this persists over the projection period. You have the butter price much higher than that of skim milk powder, for example. And this development is attributed to a relatively stronger demand of milk fat compared to these non-fat solids. The fat and of course, you could also think that the contents of the milk could be adjusted if the price is that much better for fats, but that's not easy to change in the process. And that's the little overview I want to give you, and I hope you enjoy the panel now. I unfortunately have to leave because I have to do another Outlook presentation in half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Okay, and we'll hold all the tricky questions that come in for when you're back in the room later. So now I'd like to invite one by one the panelists to come up. So first we have Sabrina Kogler, who's the socioeconomist from DG Agri. We have Mariuka Matteo, who's a special advisor for the Milk Market Observatory. Yeah, thanks. Ignacio Perez Dominguez is on the screen right now. He's joining us online. And we have Benoit Cassard, who is with us, member of the European Parliament. And as he'll be speaking in French, he's joined by his interpreter. So what I will do is first give the floor to Ignacio since he's online. It's a smoother transition, and then we'll go from my right down the panel in that direction. So Ignacio, it's nice to see you. I'll give each of you, around 4 or 5 minutes to make your remarks, and then we'll have a panel discussion after. Just to say, for the interpretation, it will be consecutive, correct? And okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, Ignacio, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Leanne. Thanks a lot to Tassos and also the Forum for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you. Sadly, I couldn't go to Brussels this time, but I promise I'll make it next time. A few thoughts about the presentation that we just saw. Also, thanks to Marcel for the presentation. I mean, we see that on the livestock side we have a demand story. I mean, that then follows up. Unfolds into some considerations on the production side. But let's start by the demand story. We are listening. We are hearing a lot about healthy diets, about shifts in the consumption patterns of people, especially in developed economies. We just have co-authored the Eat Lancet 2 study, so you probably saw already some media attention about this diet, which basically tells people to eat less meat and more proteins from vegetable origin. Now, when I first write a paper about a diet, and then I coordinate the European outlook part at the GRC, and then we see that meat demand it still increases. I ask myself, are we making a mistake, or do we see that point in time, that turn point in time where we start eating or consuming less meat? So it's also a bit of a question also to the audience and to the panelists. I guess that the demand of dairy and meats has also evolved from also raw commodity, more kind of clean cuts on the battery, to also processed foods, which contain also a lot of meats, so convenience food. So probably we see this decline in the trend. So this is a slower meat demand. But if we look in countries like the EU, groups of countries, we still don't see that reverse gear, that decline. But that might come at some point. So maybe the medium term is not enough. So maybe this is something that we are looking ahead further down. Now, if we look at the prices, Marcel explained it very well. Prices are more or less stable in real terms. No major story there. Probably also caused by these tensions between the lower demand or the more limited demand and the lack of problems on the supply side at this moment. If we look at the supply side of the livestock sector, we do see some tensions, especially in terms of environmental constraints. So in some economies, we see problems to get pastures to ruminants. This can be linked to climate change. So there's been, we have been discussing also with my colleagues at DG Agri, the development of pasture land and how this affects ruminant production, and also further policies that limit the amount of nitrogen that can be excreted by the animals per hectare of land. So all this puts a little bit of constraints on the supply side. Now, one thing that is very interesting, I think Marcel showed a little bit, and I think it's something that deserves attention, is the decoupling between livestock production and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this is something, it's a kind of a success story that is starting to pop up, that the implementation of mitigation technologies is allowing to keep production stable, but reduce the amount of emissions per kilogram of meat. And I think so there was a very nice slide by Marcelo on this. And I think this also, if we look at the bigger picture, maybe we will touch upon these issues along the conference. There's some kind of decoupling of GDP growth with the increase of emissions. I think the OECD has published quite some work on this. And I think it's very interesting to look at this, because we are changing the paradigm that increasing production means increasing emissions. So maybe we are already seeing some spotlights of this sustainable intensification. So I think with this, Leanne, I think I leave it here and then look forward for further discussion. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Ignacio. Also, I think this issue of the decoupling and how it links to the conversations we've been having about innovation and technology is really important. So I'll pass it first to Sabrina, who is here with us in the room, to make your remarks. Thank you.
Okay, it's working, yes. Thank you very much for having me and for participating at this meeting, also for discussing the outlook on livestock. I actually want to make specifically the link to what already mentioned, Ignacio already mentioned on pasture grassland systems. What kind of implications would the livestock outlook have for the development of grassland? So what we can see here is on the global term, and I think that's something that also Marcel already mentioned is that there is a structural increase in cow herd and also for sheep, but this is not the case for the EU. So in the EU, we face a decline in cow herd and sheep, and this could be something, or this is something that's happening on a long way, structural, and we see that there is a difference in like that more farms are going to be bigger and more concentrated while small ones are basically like dropping out. So how is this important basically to my grassland livestock interaction? Also because we are currently working on this to see more the developments, what's going on, and to basically unfold the bigger picture. And the EU livestock and dairy milk production is very much dependent, or like grazing livestock is supporting the EU milk and meat production very much. So on that way, we can already see, compared to some other systems, which are also in the OECD FAO Outlook, that dairy systems in the EU are grass and feed based, and therefore are vital for maintaining grasslands. On the other hand, we see that there is a decline in grasslands. In the past, basically from 1970 to 2007, grasslands have been decreased by 30% in Western countries. And when we look at the latest EEA report on inventory greenhouse gas emissions, they said that the pasture decline was 5% between 2005 and 2023. So we see that in historical terms, there has been a bigger decline, but there's still decline in pasture systems there. And now we can ask ourselves, where does it come from, and how is that important basically to livestock, to the livestock outlook and to the livestock decline? And I think we tried basically in our analysis, or that we are working on currently, to see how much livestock are basically affecting, or the livestock decline is basically affecting the decline in grassland systems as well. And what we know is that there is a decline in grazing practices due to less grazing animals, also because these grazing systems, which mostly are extensive systems, which basically are important for biodiversity of grassland systems, are decreasing in terms of farm holdings that are mostly mixed farms. And we have seen from the latest Eurostat data on farm structure survey that 70% of these farms have been dropped out of the system, basically. To just like basically unfold the picture on what's going on the grassland livestock interaction, there is on the one hand a very big land abandonment issue in, for example, the Mediterranean and mountainous areas for grassland systems, while on the other hand you would have intensification for areas which it's more easy for them out of productivity to basically substitute to, or like to convert to arable land. So at the end, I want to say, what does that mean for the outlook? And what does that mean, what we have to see for the livestock outlook? Also, when we look at this picture on what happens on grassland systems, that extensive livestock systems, which are vital for grassland systems, which basically do all this biodiversity and climate opportunities, or like bring in these climate opportunities, fear to drop out much easier because of profitability issues and because of having less grazing animals on the farm. And that could then further lead to, when we have a decline in livestock, what also happens to our grasslands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That raises a lot of interesting questions, both about what we haven't talked as much about, the biodiversity story, but also makes me think a bit about our models and this question about linking the global picture of the models with what's happening at the landscape level. And your example is a very nice point about where there could be gaps that we still can sort of try to think about how to get those two types of analyses to talk to each other. So thank you very much. So next I'd like to pass over to Mayuka, who will give her comments too. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to take part to this conversation. While I was flipping through the Outlook last weekend, I was firstly intrigued by the outlook of prices. They are rising for both dairy and meat in nominal terms, but staying flat or even decreasing in real prices. And that struck me a little bit because that sounds very challenging for our farmers, which are already having issues with competitiveness. On the other hand, I try to look positive sides of things, and I learned from the report that consumption of dairy products increases globally, and world dairy trade is also projected to expand. And I really see that EU dairy sector will be part of this growth. And because we have such a great products, and we should be also exporting them widely across the world, also in the future. Coming back to the main aspect that really intrigued me in this outlook was competitiveness and sustainability. It's something that I have been thinking about lately. We all know that sustainability demands challenges the sector's competitiveness. And we all know that demands come from legislation, retail sector, and also financing sector. And it is actually good to keep in mind that while we know that EU legislation level is very strict, but actually our farmers, many European livestock farmers, do already measures that go beyond the EU level. I know Finland the best as I live there and come from there, so I would like to perhaps give an example from Finland that actually 80% of our dairy farmers, they already count their carbon footprint. They count their carbon footprint of their farm already and take measures according to that calculation. But yes, coming back to the report, I was very happy to find the following sentence in the report. Stricter environmental legislation could also lead to innovative solutions that improve the long-term competitiveness. And I certainly hope that this is the case in the future. I also agree with Mr. Haniotis that sustainable productivity growth is the only way to address both food security and sustainability. That was very well said in the morning. Therefore, I would perhaps like to urge us to concentrate on measures that actually increase productivity at the farm level and the sustainability at the same time. And milk yield is one very great example from that. Marcel actually showed a very nice slide about it, and I took note that European milk yield, it is quite high already, but it is still lacking behind from the US and Canadian levels. So that is perhaps something that we could actually look into more. And I think that farmers need support in this work. They need financing, and also CAP needs to support the investments. However, we also need added value from the markets. CAP is just not enough in this sustainability and productivity work. But I would like to conclude by addressing a few challenges which perhaps not all has been mentioned yet. Well, briefly we mentioned plant-based alternatives already in the morning. They are there in the market. Perhaps their share is quite low still, but it is growing. The future consumers will decide. Besides the plant-based alternatives, I think that we should also at least look a little bit what is happening on the sector of lab-grown dairy. That is interesting to just to know for the future what is happening there. And then the big important topic is the food security. And perhaps was it the last panel that stated that there are a lot of vulnerabilities in this food chain, And there are a lot of those on the farm level too, and we really need to address those because the market fluctuates so much. And if we don't tackle those vulnerabilities, we cannot take care of our food security properly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also highlighting some pretty interesting topics that link to other things. The carbon footprint measurement, I think, is a very interesting development. Thinking about how that lines up incentives and who gets the benefits from investing in sequestering carbon. And then when you were talking about the farmers and the implication for farmers of these different kinds of interventions at the regulatory and financial sector levels, that brings into mind what the OECD calls the triple challenge. So the issue for agriculture being that you need to think about food security and environment and farmers' livelihoods as a collective. And I thought your remarks really resonated with that, thinking about the trade-offs and synergies in that system. So I'll pass it now over to Benoit, and I think you and your interpreter will share the stage. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the translation, because my English is not very good, and I would like to speak French, and you accept this. Thank you very much. Voilà, donc merci beaucoup. Je vous avoue que mon premier sentiment, en ayant lu le rapport et en ayant écouté ce qui a été dit jusqu'à présent, c'est un sentiment d'optimisme, mais en même temps un grand sentiment de frustration. Pourquoi de frustration? Parce que j'ai l'impression que tout était écrit et que donc les décisions politiques sur lesquelles on se penche aujourd'hui n'ont pas beaucoup d'incidence, puisque tout est déjà prévu sur la production, notamment de l'agriculture en Europe. Je dis ça un peu ironiquement, mais c'est un peu frustrant, parce qu'à mon avis, aujourd'hui, on est vraiment à un tournant pour l'agriculture européenne et mondiale, et les décisions qu'on va devoir prendre dans les mois qui viennent vont avoir pour moi une implication énorme sur le niveau de la production du cheptel européen. Deux chiffres. Depuis les années 1990, le cheptel a diminué de 30%. Un autre chiffre, on est passé de 105 millions de bovins au niveau européen à 75. Donc c'est une forte diminution. Deuxième élément, la moyenne d'âge des agriculteurs et des éleveurs en Belgique, à mon avis c'est assez similaire au niveau européen, est de 59 ans. Donc avoir des prévisions de stabilité de la production dans un contexte pareil, ça me paraît optimiste. Peut-être je vais laisser.
So, thank you very much. My first feeling when reading through the report and listening to the interesting debate was a mixed feeling, both of optimism on the one hand and frustration also on the other hand. And I think when hearing and reading this, we can think that everything is already predicted. So what about politics in this? What are the decisions we can make? I'm maybe being a bit ironic, but I have to say that we're really at a crossroads today, and the decisions that will be made, the choices that will be taken, will have important consequences for me and other farmers in the future. So when talking about livestock, I have to mention a few numbers, and one of them is the decrease of 30% of livestock in Europe in the last year. So we went from 105 million animals to 75 million, which is a huge decrease. And I want to mention another number, which is the average age of a farmer today in Belgium, which is 59 years old. And I do think that the numbers are quite similar for the rest of Europe. So what is going to become with these trends? This is a question.
Oui. Aujourd'hui, par exemple, je vais citer 4 exemples très précis. On voit que par rapport aux émissions de l'élevage, on peut aborder les choses de manière diamétralement opposée. Soit on fait des raisonnements au niveau des objectifs de diminution de CO2 à la surface. Le continent européen produit autant d'émissions globalement, on veut le diminuer, sans tenir compte des autres paramètres, soit on se dit, on veut maintenir notre production et travailler sur des techniques pour continuer à maintenir la production en diminuant les CO2. Mais c'est un choix fondamental. Parce que si on ne tient pas compte dans la première hypothèse, on va diminuer les émissions de CO2, par exemple en diminuant le bétail, en allant vers plus d'élevage extensif. Mais on ne doit pas oublier que si on fait cela, on va compenser notre consommation par des importations qui ont des impacts environnementaux ailleurs dans le monde et qui globalement ont le même effet négatif. Pour moi, c'est une grande erreur à ne pas commettre. Par contre, si on veut diminuer les émissions de manière réaliste, puisqu'on voit que la consommation va être stable, voire continuer à augmenter, on doit travailler sur des techniques qui permettent de diminuer nos émissions tout en maintenant notre production. Ça doit être pour moi une hypothèse de base. Mais donc c'est déjà un choix très politique et très important dès le départ. Deuxième élément très concret, on est aujourd'hui dans la préparation de la PAC qui aura lieu entre 2028 et 2034. Un choix très simple. Est-ce qu'on va continuer à coupler les aides à l'élevage ou on va le découpler? Je peux vous assurer que si on découple les aides aux éleveurs, avec la moyenne d'âge des éleveurs aujourd'hui, on va avoir une accélération terrible de la diminution du cheptel européen. C'est une décision très technique et très précise. Troisième choix politique crucial à mon avis, mais je vais d'abord laisser le traducteur.
So I will give you an example of today's situation. With regards to CO2 emission, we are faced with a very concrete choice, and we have two parallel or different options. The first one will be to say we have a sort of surface objective in terms of CO2 reduction, and we want to reduce emissions whatever we do. So this is the absolute objective, and we stop producing livestock maybe to reach that. Or another option is that we want to keep producing meat and to work with livestock while diminishing the emissions associated with that production. So with the first option, the first idea, we would be maybe turning to more extensive forms of grazing and of production. But in order to compensate for the decrease of production associated, we would have to import to respect the local consumption needs. So those imports would actually still have an impact in terms of emissions, but just elsewhere in the world. So it's only displacing the problem. But if we work on the basis of this second idea, that we want to develop the technologies that will allow us to keep on producing with reduced CO2 emissions, well, I do think that this is the way forward and this is what we should do. Another very concrete example I could give you is that of the PAC. We're now in the phase of preparing for the next PAC, which will come into play for 2028 and 2034. And we have to make a choice between coupled or decoupled subsidies for livestock production. And if we make the wrong choice, we will see a huge decrease in terms of livestock production, which is also linked to the notion of the age of the average age of the farmers that I was mentioning before.
Deux autres exemples encore, et puis on passera à autre chose. Mais le commerce international. Aujourd'hui, l'Europe veut soutenir les agriculteurs en renforçant le rôle de l'agriculteur, c'est un texte qu'on a voté la semaine passée, dans la chaîne de valeur. On veut lui donner un meilleur prix. OK ? Et en même temps que de signer ce texte, on s'apprête à signer un accord avec le Mercosur qui va pousser le prix de nos produits vers le bas, puisqu'il va augmenter des importations. Et je ne m'égarerai pas dans tous les tous les cahiers de charges, les standards, etc. Simplement, si on augmente les importations, d'autant plus si c'est des produits qui ont un prix de revient plus bas, on va pousser le prix vers le bas. Donc, quelque part, on est face à une hypocrisie de dire on veut soutenir les agriculteurs. Donc, on va obliger les entreprises qui achètent des produits aux agriculteurs de faire des contrats basés sur des coûts de revient. Et en même temps, ces entreprises, on veut qu'elles soient compétitives par rapport à des produits importés. C'est tout à fait paradoxal. Il y a un choix politique clair qui doit être fait. Soit on protège notre marché grâce au respect de nos normes, soit on aide les agriculteurs en augmentant ou en stabilisant le budget de la politique agricole commune. Or, aujourd'hui, on voit que là aussi, il y a une diminution du budget. Donc, on s'apprête à laisser baisser les prix des productions agricoles tout en diminuant le budget PAC. Donc, on voit que là, il y a des choix clairs qui vont être faits dans les prochaines semaines et qui vont être cruciaux pour l'avenir de la production européenne. Donc, je reviens à mon hypothèse de départ, dire voilà, la production va augmenter de 14% au niveau mondial quand la consommation va augmenter de 13%. Tout va bien, ok, mais moi je ne pense pas qu'on peut déjà le dire aujourd'hui, parce qu'en fonction de tous les choix que je viens d'énumérer, on voit que l'autosuffisance alimentaire de l'Europe, elle peut tourner à la catastrophe ou elle peut se redynamiser si on fait d'autres choix. Mais aujourd'hui, on a une grande responsabilité, du moins je l'espère, au niveau politique, pour déterminer ce que sera le futur de l'alimentation mondiale.
So I will give you two other examples that are relevant. First of all, we're talking about internationalization of trade. And of course, if we have this will at European level to support farmers, which is something we actually voted in a text last week, we want to give them a better role in the supply chain. And to do that, we must guarantee fair and higher prices for the farmers and for the agricultural products. But in the same time, we're also signing the Mercosur trade agreement. I wouldn't delve into the details of how it will have implications for the conditions of production and the different standards associated that are better in Europe. But if we import more, then of course prices mechanically will go down. So we're faced with a form of hypocrisy there. To solve this, either we decide to protect our market with our high standards and norms of production, or we could also decide to help the farmers through the CAP mechanism. But then, if we do not do this, if we have this decrease in the terms of food pricing, and also there's other phenomena, then farmers will be left struggling. So we are at a crossroads, and we must make very important and fundamental choices for the future of food production in Europe. I will go back to this number of this increase of 14% of the global food production and 13% of increase in the global food consumption. So if we hear that, we can say, well, this is all right. Everything is rosy and everything is going to go well. But actually, no. If we want to remain self-sufficient or to be self-sufficient in Europe, we have to make a choice and see where things are going to go. Either they could go in a very good direction or in a very wrong direction, depending on the political choices we will have to make. And this is why we have such a huge responsibility today.
Okay, great. So what I'm observing is that we're really putting on this panel farmers front and center. We've heard a lot about land use around the livestock sector. And also, I think this issue of competitiveness versus leakage. So when you put regulations in place in one country, does that not move production that's negative for the environment just somewhere else in the world? So these are debates that are obviously critical when we're talking about world food markets. So I'm curious, before I open the floor, if anybody on the panel would like to highlight particular types of measures or policies or research that is helping to move us in the right direction for thinking about solutions for what's going on in the livestock sector. Because we have heard in this session a bit about the challenges, particularly for farmers. We've heard what happens to biodiversity. We've heard about the aging farming population, which maybe raises questions around how quickly we're going to have technological adoption of new technologies also. So I'm sort of opening the floor to see if people have optimistic suggestions. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. It's a great question. I will give you one example, which our one Finnish farmer just told me a few weeks ago, dairy farmer, quite young one, and he wanted to increase their milk yield on their farm. And what he had to do in order to do that was to make the conditions for the cows better. So they actually needed to invest for better cow house, make bedding better, look into the feeding, and so those are that kind of farm level things that you can do on the farm, but it means that you have to get the knowledge and also, perhaps a little premium price for it from the dairy or some kind of encouragement to do that work. And he told me that while they improved the conditions for their dairy cows, the milk yield went up. And while you increase the milk yield, you actually decrease the greenhouse gas emissions per milk liter. So that is somehow, I really would like to see more of those measures that increase at the same time productivity and sustainability. And I think that our farmers need, perhaps there needs to be some kind of legislation level on the bottom, but our dairies and already actually praise premium price for those measures that dairy farmers are doing. So it is both ways, not only the legislation, but also from the retail sector.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also this role of kind of the knowledge, the constellation of things that bring the knowledge forward, to bring new innovation, to try new things, extension, research and development, investments in those kinds of areas from the public sector, I think are also important. Before I go to you, could I just check with Ignacio, because sometimes the person who's on the screen feels left out. So would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, maybe briefly too. Thanks to Mr. Casar for the very, very nice comments. He raised the issue of leakage. And I think now we're hearing a little bit also about different, what we call the win-wins, no? So there's obviously options. There might be management or there might be technological that are just out there and we just don't know about them. And this is basically that by just picking up on them, we might improve the productivity of our farming system and so on. But there is few of those, and this is not so easy to find. There's of course many other options that have attached a cost, and we have done quite a lot of work at the JRC to kind of pinpoint at different technologies that allow to continue producing livestock, basically trying to keep our livestock sector as it is and avoid what was mentioned by Mr. Casal, basically extensivize and make the livestock sector disappear. This is not the idea. By improving genetics, by managing better the manure and by better applying the fertilizer and so on. Now, all these sustainability policies, and I think this is something we have picked up in the Commission quite well in the last few years, have implications on trade. And we have heard about this. If we put additional burden to our farmers and make the cost of production higher, we will probably replace production in Europe by imports from outside. But some of the legislation we are looking now at, I mean, we've discussed UDR also in the previous panels. We have touched upon animal welfare legislation. We're talking about now mitigation, basically reducing the carbon footprint of the agricultural sector. Some of these legislation have already annexes and attachments to them that allow Europe not to lose competitiveness. If we look at the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, for instance, is one of the examples of policies that actually, in this case, affecting the agricultural sector with the fertilizer sector, basically affect the fertilizer sector by attaching a carbon price to the production of fertilizers, but then at the same time trying to control for potential imports of, so to say, dirty fertilizers. So there's ways to adjust the trade, and this is open for discussion, but there's options to reduce the leakage by adjusting also trade flows. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Ignacio. Benoit, did you want to come in?
Oui, merci pour les commentaires. Juste une chose, qui est un lien entre la productivité et la durabilité jusqu'à un certain niveau, je peux accepter, votre commentaire était juste, mais ça a une limite. Je vais vous donner un exemple précis. Le bien-être des animaux en cours de transport, un dossier dont je m'occupe au niveau du Parlement européen. On parle de la densité du nombre de bêtes dans un camion. C'est très technique. On veut diminuer, la proposition de la Commission est de diminuer la densité de 30%. D'accord ? On voit, les professionnels voient que quand les bêtes ne sont pas assez serrées dans un camion, elles se déplacent beaucoup plus, elles peuvent avoir des chocs, et donc les animaux sont moins bien. Et en même temps, on augmente le nombre de camions sur les routes de 30%. Donc vous voyez, c'est un exemple de gens qui n'ont pas l'expérience de terrain, qui disent les animaux ils seront mieux s'ils ont plus de place. A priori, ça part de quelque chose d'évident. Mais en réalité, les animaux, quand on ne les met pas assez nombreux, ils se bousculent beaucoup plus les uns les autres. Le coût de production augmente. Le bien-être animal recule. Vous voyez ? Donc, il y a quand même des limites. Deuxième élément, monsieur parlait du CBAM. Mais aujourd'hui, on est à la veille, au 1er janvier, on va voir le CBAM qui va faire exploser le coût des engrais, alors qu'on a déjà un coût explosé des engrais avec les mesures, les sanctions qu'on a prises vers les Russes qui nous fournissent 25% de l'énergie nécessaire pour faire les engrais. Donc, on a des coûts additionnels pour les agriculteurs pour des normes environnementales qui, d'un autre côté, alors qu'on vend nos céréales au prix du marché mondial. Donc, l'agriculture, dans ce cas-là, il est pris en sandwich entre le prix mondial et un cahier de charges très élevé au niveau environnemental. C'est là un grand danger actuel. C'est de vouloir atteindre des objectifs très élevés au niveau environnemental sans protéger assez le prix payé par au producteur. Un autre danger, c'est le discours du consommateur. Si vous interrogez le consommateur, ils vont tous vous dire qu'ils sont prêts à payer plus pour l'environnement, plus pour le bien-être animal. Mais quand ils sont devant le rayon de poulet, dans la grande surface, et qu'ils ont en fin de mois un budget très limité, ils ne pensent plus à ça. Hein. Donc, il y a un moment donné, il faut incorporer ces données économiques-là dans le raisonnement tenu par les consommateurs et ne pas se fier à leur discours. Vous avez vu, la Commission européenne voulait 25% de production biologique dans le cadre du Green Deal. La consommation, c'est moins de 5%. Qu'est-ce qu'on a fait ? On a voulu faire trop de bio, on a tué le bio, puisque avec une surproduction de produits bio, on a un effondrement du prix bio qui est payé alors au conventionnel, et le producteur, il a des coûts supplémentaires à cause du bio. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'il fait? Il arrête le bio. Oui, il faut quand même raisonner de manière globale l'environnement, l'économie, le social, mais un ne va pas sans l'autre. Et ce qu'il faut éviter par-dessus tout, c'est le raisonnement en silo. Il faut composer avec les différents éléments, l'économie, le social, l'environnement, et bien tenir compte de l'ensemble des éléments.
So, thank you very much for your comments. I'd like to say a word on the link between productivity and sustainability and the well-being of the animals. I do agree with you, but only to a certain extent. This is right until we reach a limit. I will give you an example to illustrate that. For the well-being of animals when they are being transported, it's a topic that I've actually been working on at the European level. So the suggestion was to reduce the number or the density of animals in one truck while they are being transported. And the stated objective was to decrease that density by 30%. But experts or anyone who is on the ground knows that animals, when they are less numerous in a truck, will be more fearful, they will shock and clash with one another, they will be more agitated, and you will also increase the number of trucks on the road if you take this measure by 30%. So something that to anyone who's unexperienced on this topic might seem very obvious is actually not a good solution because, as I've said, the animals are more agitated, more stressed out, and then you increase the costs as well as emissions, and you decrease the actual well-being of the animals, which was your objective. And so I can also react to what my colleague has said on the CBAM. So, of course, we will have an increase of fertilizers because of the CBAM when we already are facing an increase in the cost and the price of fertilizers because of the sanctions against Russia that provides us with 25% of the energy required to produce said fertilizers. So, in other words, we would increase the cost, but we would still sell our grain or cereals or products on the global market at the same price, which is a lower one. So this would create a form of pincer movement that would crush the farmers in that case. So we've got to be very careful of this. Environmental norms, if we want to have them high, why not? But we cannot have at the same time a decreasing price of agricultural goods because then this will be completely detrimental for the producers. We also need to be careful when talking about the consumers because the consumers will very often say, well, yes, of course, I want to support environmental friendly food. I want to pay more to have a good food. This is great in theory, but when a consumer is maybe at the end of the month struggling to make ends meet, in a supermarket, they will completely forget this whole thing and they will actually not pay more, although they said that they would do. So we have to base ourselves on solid facts, on evidence, rather than on assumptions about the behavior of consumers. And the EU Commission, for example, has been working on promoting organic food, which should reach 25% of the produced foods in Europe in the framework of the Green Deal. But if we produce too much organic food and consumption does not follow that production, then you're literally killing any organic food production because the prices of organic food will then decrease and the cost will be superior to what someone can make by selling this organic food on the market. And then farmers will just say, well, goodbye to organic production, I'm switching back to conventional agriculture. So here we really see the danger of thinking in silos, of not connecting the dots, and I think we have to work on the basis of those different pillars put all together, the environment, social aspects of production, and the economic aspects also.
Great. Thank you very much.
You do very well.
Exactly. Sabrina, did you want to make a couple of remarks? And then we'll go to the floor if any of you have questions. Okay, I see a couple.
So on the discussion basically on how we can bring sustainability together with productivity, and that farms don't have to necessarily make a choice between one or the other, I believe it is very difficult and very complicated, and probably context and site specific dependent. But I would say on one hand, for example, just to go back on this grassland intervention on extensive and intensive grassland systems, that I think key it is already to just say that farms are not dropping out who are extensive. So the problem is here on profitability, and for them to actually already get access to the market and get kind of remunerated so that they can make a living of it and don't not necessarily need, for example, to adapt certain measures which might, in a sense, be harmful for the environment. So I think one key aspect is already to just say not farms to drop out of the systems who decide to actually stay in extensive systems. And I think on the sense of what could be done and what could be improved, and also on how do we say on consumers where basically what kind of decisions to take. I think a lot of it is that there's more data needed. We see that, for example, just on grassland systems or whatever, to just what kind of contribution do extensive livestock system put on the milk production or on the livestock production. For the moment now, it's rather difficult to basically go more in detail and like check on the drivers and like see what kind of systems are behind and how much they contribute to. So I think, of course, we can always say more data is needed, but at some point it's just the case at some point too. So yes, that's just the point that I want to make.
Yeah, I'm glad we're circling back to data and analysis and understanding, like really taking informed decisions, which I think is the point that the panelists are making. So, Tassos, you indicated you wanted to ask a question. Are there other questions in the room? So, and then one over here. We'll go over there first. Thank you.
Hi there. Does this work? Yes? Okay, good. Sorry, I can't hear it. Hi, my name is Lucia McKenzie. I'm from Politico. I just wanted to ask about the livestock strategy that was in the Commission's work program for the upcoming year. I was wondering if you could give any indication of what we should expect and if it will be, addressing many of the issues that we were discussing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll take Tassos's question too, and then come back up to the panel. Thanks.
Since you're moderating, I don't have exactly a question, but a comment. If I overdo it, cut me off. But I think we have mixed what is a policy debate with what is in the livestock outlook. And it is very important to come back to a point that was raised this morning. In the outlook, what we put in is the policies that are there and not the ones that are about to change. So while I would agree with many of the points that you raised, especially in the mistakes that the Commission made with the farm-to-fork type of strategy, this is not what has come in. And what is in my view, a weakness that we had because of the structure of the model that we haven't really focused much. I've been following, and I did a lot of analysis back from 1992, what was happening in the sector. And whether we had the McSharry reform, which actually increased the support in the sector, unlike cereals, whether we had the decoupling and the choices that member states made, or more recently, what you have is a rather constant long-term downward trend in the number of animals, cattle animals, with the exception of a spike of 3 years when the dairy quotas were abolished. We have a shift between beef herd and dairy herd. We have a distinction between the so-called old and new member states, in the sense that the newest member states were using the dairy cattle for beef production, while in the West it's different. And we had, and that's the last point, which for me is also very important for climate action, the extensive livestock. on grassland. And grassland is 40% of agricultural land. So it's huge in the European Union and plays a major role. So when Sabrina mentioned that we're losing actually part of this, it's very important to know we're losing it to what? Is it going back to forests? Is it going to, arable production, which means an increase in emissions? This is where I don't get exactly from this outlook where we're going, because the global path and the EU path are totally diverging, but the model that we're using with the old and the new member states still doesn't have the capacity, I think, to capture these details.
Great.
And Marcel is left.
I know Marcel's not here to talk about the model right in detail if he comes back, or maybe Ignacio can. But first, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Lucia was asking a question more specific to EU policy. Did you? Livestock, sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, on the livestock strategy, basically, I'm not personally completely involved with what we can say so far, and colleagues of mine are basically more contributing to this, that it's like a bottom-up approach of all different stakeholders trying together to see how we can basically improve the situation of the livestock sector, to give them a future in terms of how on the one side I can be profitable and be competitive, but still on the other side meet the environmental and climate goals that basically the Commission is putting in place. So there are different stakeholders coming together, and at some point want to see different opinions of these sectors, whether what can be done, and also because it's in the vision of agriculture to just foster more extensive production systems. But as we have this, it's not still decoupled with competitiveness, I would say. We still have to see in what kind of direction that will go, and at the end of the process, there should be some strategy that's going to help the sector to thrive, let's say. I hope that clarified a little bit.
Great, thank you. Tassos said he had a comment, but it was kind of a question, and I don't know if you had any reaction, Ignacio, to Tassos's comment about the model and model underlying outlook in the absence of Marcel.
Yeah, thanks. So on the model side, just to say that we have different set of models at the GRC. So the agling model, which is, I was working at the OECD with Marcel before, so I know quite well. And I was doing for 5 years outlooks at the OECD with some of the colleagues that were intervening today. We are at a good place to analyze trade issues, to analyze global issues. Now, for me working at the European Commission, it's kind of the tool to analyze how Europe is integrated in the world, how issues that have been discussed now about trade, imports of livestock or externalities can be tackled. But of course, we have a suite of models. Bence was mentioning this morning the farm level model, IFM-CAP, that we have. I also was raised for 10 years using the CAPRI model, which is a regionalized model for the European Union. And we use these models depending on the issue at stake. Maybe Tassos can give a couple of words about the work we did on the farm to fork and the different aspirational targets that they were proposed in the past, and to a certain extent were not well thought through and glued together. And Monsieur Casar has raised some of the elements of the costs that can be facing farmers, or the fact that we want to see all organic doesn't fly by itself, because you need to have a demand for that. And many of those elements were shown in this study that we produced. This was 5 years ago. Now, about the livestock strategy, I am directly involved in some of the animal welfare elements, the ban of cages, and we are discussing currently with Fante how we're going to model this. Potentially, we will use the CAPRI model for this, but we are thinking about different options. The idea is to try to see how costly and what are the impacts of free range egg production. and also some of these elements on the pork and cattle sectors. But this livestock strategy, I think I've been nominated as part of the Interservice Group consultation. It's covering other issues. To me, I'm not quite into it right now, but I think it tries to basically fix some of those, glue all some of these elements together. We want to sustain the livestock sector in the EU. That's for sure. But we want to make it also sustainable. How do you do this in a way that you don't harm consumers, that you don't harm farmers? This is the big question, and this is what's been discussed within this strategy.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm not seeing any more questions, so what I'm going to do is invite the panel for, oh wait, one more. Okay. And then we'll come to the panel for final remarks. Yeah.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'm actually going to try and give an answer. And I'm going to come back to Tassos' question. And probably he's the best person who could probably provide an answer. He asked a question that we're losing, where the livestock sector, where are we losing it to? My name is Liam McHale. I'm from the Irish Farmers Association. And it's very simple. I'll give you maybe some examples from our own country. We're losing livestock farmers from the sector. So an average suckler farm in Ireland is maybe 20 cattle. So the older 59-year-old average age livestock farmer, his family aren't following him. 2 children, 4 children, well educated. They make the decision based on the numbers, and they're choosing accountancy or teaching or nursing, but they're not following their parents. When the milk quotas were lifted, we lost some from the livestock sector into dairy. But already we see now that maximum milk production has probably been reached within Ireland and maybe across Europe. There's not enough research and innovation. We're not improving our productivity fast enough, unlike in other parts of the world. We've got trade measures and trade agreements that have not managed to incorporate equivalence of standards. And that is not encouraging for anybody to continue in the livestock sector, particularly when you're in Ireland and we export 80% of our products. Looking at live animal transport, we have transitioned to pure beef from our suckler herd to getting more beef from our dairy herd. And that's a result of the live animal transport regulation, and there is a shift taking place. But it's probably an amalgamation of regulation that is probably the biggest factor that our young farmers face today. And finally, it is the sometimes negative publicity that is out there in relation to the livestock sector. And maybe we're not the best people to give that positive message. You know, we provide a very great source of protein, but you don't see protein on all of the packaging of red meat. You see it on breakfast products and dairy products and drinks, talking about this great source of protein, but you know, we're not telling people that red meat and animal protein is probably one of the best and most complete sources. So perhaps that goes some way to answering Tassos' question, but I'm always happy to hear other answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. So now we're wrapping up this panel, and what I'd like to do, like previous panels, is ask the panelists for their one takeaway. So 1 minute. And again, I'll go first to you, Ignacio, since you have the intervention from the screen for us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think I will be brief because I intervened quite a bit. My takeaway from this discussion is that there is some inconsistencies in the way we are putting up policies to analyze the livestock sector, specifically in this case the European livestock sector, and we need to be conscious of of the issues that there are costs attached to environment, to sustainability, and that these three dimensions, social, economic, and environment, have to be together. The other takeaway is that, well, we can do certain things with the models we have at hand, but we are limited, and I think it was mentioned also by Marcel before, not all the granularity of a policy like the Common Agricultural Policy can be analyzed by means of models. We try to do a scenario analysis and to look at different issues at once, and then try to provide some analysis, but it's difficult to incorporate all the angles that we are actually discussing. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Ignacio. And now I'll pass down to Benoit. There you go.
Oui, je voudrais profiter de cette dernière minute pour faire une remarque encore entre extensif et intensif. Bien sûr, le bovin, les ruminants ont une place importante dans la valorisation de l'herbe et des prairies obligées qui représentent un grand pourcentage du territoire européen. Mais aussi, le bovin a un grand rôle à jouer dans les zones de grande culture, dans le cadre d'une économie circulaire. Le bovin peut transformer les sous-produits de l'agriculture végétale en fertilisants, en énergie. Et donc, à ce niveau-là, il a un rôle très important aussi, et notamment pour la santé des sols. Et ce rôle-là, quand on l'analyse en termes d'impact CO2, on doit tenir compte de ces différents rôles, et il permet d'augmenter la capacité d'un terroir en termes de production de food, de feed, mais aussi d'énergie. Donc, food, feed, fuel. Il ne faut pas négliger cet aspect-là des choses, et il ne faut pas partir uniquement dans l'élevage extensif basé sur le pâturage, même si, comme je dis, il a toutes ses raisons d'être. Ça dépend. Oh, pardon.
Okay.
So to conclude, I wanted to add another point on extensive and intensive production. So of course, ruminants have a huge role to play when they are left on huge spaces and grassland with the obligatory percentage of this grassland, and they represent anyways a huge percentage of the land use in the European Union. But they also have another role to play associated with vegetable production, for instance, for a circular economy. So the bovines, the ruminants, will be able to transform the so-called waste products of vegetable or other forms of agricultural production into other services, which can be fertilizers, different entrants, sources of energy also, and this is hugely beneficial for the health of the soil. So you see that they can be used another way to create food, feed, and fuel. So of course, extensive grazing is here to stay, and it's important. I'm not denying that, but we also have to see the other services that the bovine population can play.
Great. Thank you very much. Mariuka.
Thank you. I would like to end with a positive comment. As the report stated, that consumption of dairy products actually increases globally, and I really believe that European dairy can have a role in it. And as I explained earlier on, that European farmers are already doing sustainability measures on their farms, at least many of them already. They are decreasing greenhouse gas emissions already. And actually in the report it was stated that as we have the stricter environmental legislation, that it could lead to innovative solutions and therefore improve the long-term competitiveness. I think that we can make this real, and as our farmers are already doing, we are already on that path. So I hope that we will look into a bright future.
Great. Thank you very much. Last words.
So I'll also be very brief on this. I think at the end of the day, we have to realize that basically to make the livestock sector also profitable and to sustain it for the future, that basically we have to look at each other situation individually and like, as it is context specific, site specific, and also that every farmer basically can carry out his activity to a way that he can make profit of it, because every farm that we drop is dropping out is basically one farm already too much. So at that point, it means that every farm who can carry out activity should also do so by still meeting the sustainability and like requirements that we basically set. And I think that's it on this.
Great. All right, so that's the wrap up. So please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you so much.